is Maggie, and I am a Chinese-American adoptee who went back to China for 23 days this past summer. This is part 2 of my 2-part series, where I'm going to be talking about the emotional journey. For reference, I was born in 2002 and adopted in 2003. My sister was born in 2005 and adopted in 2008. We traveled to China with the TIES program along with 23 other adoptees and their families. I do want to preface that we all had very different experiences, expectations, hopes, and sort of conclusions coming in and out of this trip. The reason I tell you that is because some of the adoptees were from the South or the Midwest or just the West of the United States. So growing up, we had different levels of diversity in our towns, and that really impacts how you grow up as an adoptee. In my case, I grew up in central New Jersey, and my town is 63% white and 19% Asian. That Asian umbrella does encompass South Asian, Southeast Asian, just everyone that the census calls Asian, so not just East Asian. Growing up, I did have books about adoption. There was Chinese memorabilia around my house, so I understood that I was adopted and that I was Chinese, but I didn't realize I was Asian and all the experiences and treatment that comes with appearing Asian until I got to high school. I should really title this video How I Found Out I Was Asian, because that would be great clickbait. I had this notion, like a lot of Asians, adoptees, that I had to pick one or the other. I either had to be a FOB and an ABG or get a balayage and join a white sorority. There's nothing wrong with any of those options, but I didn't understand that I could be comfortable occupying the gray area that I do. So in the latter half of high school and the beginning of college, I became really interested in learning about the Asian experience and the Asian American experience. I was co-president of Asian Heritage Club for 2 years, and then when I went to college, I joined the Asian American Living Learning Community and the Asian American Cultural Center mentorship program. And to take it even farther, I minored in East Asian Studies. Needless to say, I've become very comfortable in my identity as a Chinese adoptee and an Asian American. The ages of the adoptees on this trip ranged from 13 to 28. So there was a vast difference in how we navigated this trip. So I'm going to start with what people came to hear, which is how did I feel about my province visit and my orphanage visit. Leading up to the trip, I was not really dragging my feet, but I wasn't telling anyone at the same time, which is kind of hard to explain because family members would be like, aren't you excited? This is amazing. You're going to China for almost a month. And I did think it was amazing, and I was excited to have this life experience, but at the same time, I was kind of not knowing how to feel. And it wasn't until I met the other adoptees on the trip where they shared that they had similar thoughts of just putting it on the back burner and kind of ignoring it until they were at the airport. The way that I viewed the trip was that I'm a Chinese American adoptee visiting China as a tourist. Some of the other adoptees, I think, saw it more as I'm a Chinese person returning to China. I didn't once speak Mandarin while I was there, and I know that comes off as well, you're in when in Rome, do as Romans do, but I was just embarrassed to speak Mandarin because I don't know a lot and my pronunciation is bad, and it's hard for locals to understand that I look this way, but I don't act the way they think I'm gonna act. When I'm walking in New York, which is a very diverse place, I just assume everyone is American and from the United States because that's how diverse New York is. So I don't put it past people that they can or can't speak English. It's just a roll of the dice, and who really cares because so many people speak 2 languages. But in China, even when my guides would explain to kids who came up to us or taxi drivers that I couldn't speak Mandarin, they were like, well, why? Why can't she speak Mandarin? She's Chinese. There was another instance, and I heard this through the grapevine, of one of the girls from California being approached by a man, and he was like, you're Chinese? And she was like, yeah. And he's like, no, you're not. You're too black to be Chinese. And that's because she was tan. So my point is, I wasn't really trying to fit in or blend in. Some of the other adoptees had different expectations and hopes for their visit. Some of them wanted to meet the director from when they were there, and sometimes nurses came to the orphanage to meet returning adoptees. Coming out of my sister's province visit, where we met her foster parents who had her for over 2 years, they were also the former director and his wife, I was really grateful that my sister got the more intimate experience because she is more neutral to the process, where if I had an experience like that where I could technically keep in contact with them for the rest of my life, I would feel like I have ties to China forever, and it would really change the dynamic of how I just go about my day. So as I was talking to the other adoptees, they all had very strong feelings, whether good, bad, scared, nervous, excited, and I didn't have a lot of feelings. I was just kind of like, yep, we're going and we're gonna see my finding spot and I'll talk to the director. But seeing them be nervous was like making me feel, should I be nervous? The night before, I kind of cried, not because I didn't want to go, but because I was just, I think, far from home. The first thing we did on that morning was go to my finding spot, which is the #1 market for farm and produce in Guiping City, Guangxi. We got to walk around and see the vendors, and I won't lie, I was sort of looking at the little nooks and crannies being like, is this where I was placed as a baby? There were old people walking in the city, so I also had those thoughts of like, do these people know me? Am I distantly related to any of them? After that, I went to the old orphanage building, which they stopped using in 2005. It didn't look like it was in use. It looked pretty run down, but I wasn't walking through a building thinking like, was I in this room? And that I think was better for me. After that, we went to the current orphanage, and it was a very brightly colored building. In the room, it was the current director, who wasn't the director when I was there, my guide, and just my family. I got to look through my files and I got some interesting information about how much I weighed or how good of an eater and sleeper I was. I showed the director photos from throughout my life. She gave me this little wall decoration that's hanging up right behind me. To me, meeting the director was like meeting your mom's friend who knew you as a kid, and they're like, oh, do you remember me? So there is that feeling of like our paths have crossed before, but not so intimate as like a foster family or the person who found me. One of the most frequent questions I get when I was telling people I was going to China and afterwards, after the trip, was if I was interested in doing a birth search. If you asked me while I was in high school, I would probably say yes, but since growing up and becoming more comfortable with the unknown, I am no longer interested. In China, they see pursuing a birth search as sort of being ungrateful for the life you've been given and the sacrifice that your birth mother had to take in surrendering you. I was also told that if I pursued a birth search, I would not be welcome at the orphanage, and that ties into a few controversial findings where an orphanage was not acquiring, that's like not the right word, but I don't know what else to say, was not acquiring their babies in ethical ways. Moving on to some of the culture shock moments, I have a list here. One of them is waiting in lines. I remember we had to go to the bank one day, and we walk in, there's one teller, one customer, they're sitting at a desk, and my guide walked right up to the teller. She was inches away from his face, and she just was looking down at them. And I was like, oh my god, like she could hear and see all of this guy's finances. But if you don't go right up to people, they don't assume that you need help. When we were at the train stations, I learned very quickly that if there is a gap, you must fill it, whether with your suitcase, with your body, and if you're not touching someone else is going to take that spot. You also cannot drink the tap water in China, or you will get violently ill, and it took a while to get in the habit of not using the faucet to brush your teeth or clean your face. Toilet paper and soap are also not in many bathrooms, because when you think about China's population, if they were to supply soap and toilet paper to every single person who came in, especially at these big tourist sites, that would be like half their budget. So we had to bring our own toilet paper and our own soap. They also had no napkins at restaurants, so that doubled as our napkins. I was not really adverse to the squat toilets. I was like, hey, my legs are getting a workout. But for some people, it was a culture shock because obviously, like, that's, you gotta do your business, but you can't sit down. The humidity was also insane. I always knew that East Asia and Southeast Asia had just record levels of humidity, but we were really in China at the worst time for it, the middle of summer. There was one time where my friends got cotton candy, and the second it came out of the machine, it just started disintegrating. It reminds me of the video of that raccoon trying to clean the cotton candy and it just disappears, and they were like, quickly eat it, and like it would just melt on our fingers. The street sellers were also more, I don't want to say aggressive, but they were more determined than, say, street sellers in New York. I grew up in New Jersey, so in New York, they're just sort of on the street and you approach them. But when vendors saw our parents, they were like, yes, that one, get them. And we went to this empty mall one day, and we couldn't even like look at the clothes without them like coming up to us and like aggressively trying to sell us things. I don't think that mall ended up getting a lot of business from us because of that. And that's not to say in a judgy way, it was just a culture shock moment. Speaking of shopping, I didn't bargain. One, because I was a little nervous and I didn't have the confidence to bargain, and number two, the starting prices that they gave me were still significantly less than what I would pay in the United States. So on the final days of my China trip, I really felt like I was ready to leave. China is very much organized chaos, and our trip itself was very fast-paced. It took a huge physical and mental toll, but I remember driving to the airport, and that was the only moment where I was like, wait, I kind of want to stay. China does have this sense of community that is just not existent in the United States. In every city we went to, there was so much nightlife. These town squares would just come alive with kids and vendors and old people and dancing. It was like a county fair going on every night. And that wraps up my notes. I hope I included everything because my camera is dying and I must film an outro. So I hope you enjoyed and that you learned something. And yeah, bye-bye.